presentation, at least what it looks like, and then I have a free lunch date. We're gonna get this thing rolling. So, Ms. Rawson, if we could roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Alexander?
Here.
Mr. Bartlett is excused. Mr. Ruckus?
Here.
Dr. Coker?
Here.
Mr. Dozat has a proxy. Mr. Tedley?
Here.
Mr. DeVilliers is excused. Dr. Ebar?
Here.
Dr. Fountain?
Here.
Dr. Gorey is excused. Dr. Gray has a proxy. Mr. Pethy?
Here.
Mr. Jadia?
Here.
Dr. Joffrion?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Dr. Joseph?
Here.
Ms. Laviolette? Here. Dr. Lewis is excused. Dr. Ortland?
Here.
Mr. Powell?
Here.
Mr. Strong?
Here.
Ms. Tanner is excused. Mr. Watts?
Here.
And Mr. Williams.
Here.
You have a
Well, thank you. Good to see everybody. Thank you guys for, ladies, for making your way in the midst of such calm and comfortable and routine situations. We do appreciate that. Just by way of recognition of our guests, as always, these folks are always here, and we appreciate them. Ms. Sandy Holloway, the president of Bessie. Always doing good. Never faithful as doors. We're supposed to be one of us, but also and another special guest, Ms. Richie Strong, who's joining us today. Seriously, we're glad to have you back, man. We know you've been battling it, and your business, it's just really good to see you. We missed you, and glad to have you back for real. Now, I know I messed with you a lot, but we really are glad to have you back. Glad that those things are getting better for you. Along those lines, Scott DeVilliers is not with us today. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with Scott. Scott had a tumor behind his eye a couple years ago, had it removed, and he's having his checkup. This is his yearly checkup, so we hope that goes well for him. That's the only reason he's not here. That being said, before we just get even to the approval of minutes, just on in front of you guys, I want to say thank you for our fall conference. Wow. It was really refreshing, it was encouraging, the time that we were able to spend together working on things that were good for our kids. And so this is the press release that Mr. Fall worked with Taylor Media. We have already met this week with PAR and also with Cable to share this with them and tell them, like, we are for student outcomes. That's who we are at our core. We got into this profession because we wanted to help kids. And just that the narrative from last is now, that's who we are, that's what we're about, it's what we always have been. Sometimes that narrative was misconstrued, maybe it was shared in different ways by different people. And so thank you for your input on this. It's been really clear. It's been well received. It's nothing earth-shattering. You were doing these things anyway. It's just the idea that we framed the idea that as superintendents, all we really want to do is help kids maximize their potential. Each and every kid in our district. So it's going really well. Thank you for your input. The final working document that comes from this is not completed yet because I'm still getting some input, and it's been very helpful. So we're still working on that. I'll send that to you as soon as it's really completed with some of the detail. And so thanks to all of you for your input on that. It's been really well received, so we appreciate that. Moving on, approval of the minutes. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes from our September 4th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Second. Coker, second by Richie Strong. All in favor? Yep, any opposed? I'm still learning. I've been doing this once every few months, doesn't help me. So, all right, so the motion passes. So we have a standing item. Item number 3 for us today is consideration of issues regarding assessment and accountability. And do we have a motion to receive?
So moved.
Mr. Alexander?
second.
Yep. Motion to receive, so this time, Dr. Brummer, we'll turn this over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. First of all, I guess accountability is a broad enough topic that I can just say thank you for this. I mean, I think that this is really good. I think this is really impressive. And, you know, I think it would be hard for anyone to argue that these aren't things that we should be trying to do for kids as superintendents. So I appreciate the leadership that everyone has shown in putting out these priorities. We are working through both a period of time that is pandemic accountability and then trying to also look for what could happen post-pandemic in terms of accountability and what that means. But since we are in COVID, I would just like to give a brief update on COVID because it does relate. I believe as of yesterday morning, we've seen about 3,500 positive cases across the state in students out of over 800,000 students. So about 3,500 out of over 800,000. And so one case is too many. But I think that this number does indicate what research has shown us, that schools are not necessarily super spreaders of the virus, and also that the mitigation efforts that you guys are working so diligently alongside your school leadership and educators, those things seem to be working. Just anecdotally, in multiple conversations with many of you and your colleagues who aren't here, what I am hearing is much of the trace back of positive cases has to do with events that are outside of the school day, whereas parents or friends or students themselves are deciding to host their own proms or their own dances or their own events, and from that we end up with cases in the school. And again, I'm not presenting that as sound data of exactly what's happening. I'm just sharing that anecdotally, that's what I've heard from many of you, and I think that's probably consistent across the state. We do have, I believe, 1,600 cases, positive cases with employees. Wanted to let the group know that many of you have expressed interest in the possibility of exploring the Missouri model around quarantining of students, and basically that model is different from ours that we're using here, because here we know that we have, for instance, a high school student and they have that 15-minute exposure, et cetera. You know the drill that we quarantine those individuals, and the Missouri model says, if both individuals are wearing a face mask, which all of our kids are in high school, that you only isolate the individual who's symptomatic or sick. And so just wanted you to know, working agency to agency with LDH, that we have raised that to the experts at LDH, and have heard back from them that while that's not a place that they necessarily want to go today, that they are willing to explore that alongside us. And so I appreciate that, but I also appreciate so many of you flagging that for us and saying, hey, this might be a possibility, because it supports our thinking on evolution of our response to the virus. So thank you for that. Just an update. I looked at our statewide dashboard this morning, reopening dashboard, the connectivity dashboard, and it shows that about 49% of students across the state are face-to-face, 22% are in a hybrid, and 29% are in a virtual. I was also impressed to see that it looks like devices have been delivered in a number of places, because we have more devices than students now in the dashboard, and so that is a fairly significant shift. So I just tend to think that probably has something to do with supply chains resolutions. 72% of kids are connected, and then kudos to you all, because it's showing that you've connected 39,000 students to the internet as a district on your own. Connected 39,000, so thank you for that. Wanted to let you know that if you need some form of PPE assistance, as we turn the corner on the year, let us know, and we will try to do whatever it is that we can do to try and help you secure whatever it is that you might need to secure. Trey Follis, Ken Bradford, those individuals will help you with that. I know for sure that we do have some additional face masks. If you need those, we were able to secure some of those through a private donation. And so if you have any needs, let us know. The rapid tests that have been made available from the federal government and a pass through LDH, and we tried to coordinate some of that with you all. We are in the process of distributing those 300,000 rapid tests. As a reminder, they have to be associated with I think the word is a CLIA clinic, or CLIA school clinic or community clinic. And so Some people said, do we have to give these tests to our kids? No. We just want to help make sure that you have tests in your community with the clinics for which you have an association, so that you have those available should you need those. More information will be coming out around that. Mr. Bradford is coordinating most of that work. A lot of conversation, I've heard from many of you this morning, even on instructional minutes. Right now, in statute, there are really two ways that can be waived. One being, a disaster in the last 30 days of the school year, and the other being basically if an event happened that prompted two schools to have to merge together and platoon or something like that. I know that people are looking at this. I know that people who you have spoken to about instructional minutes who have abilities to make some shifts there. They are also exploring that. But right now, I do appreciate everyone trying to adjust calendars to make sure that instructional minutes are met, because we know that from the spring that kids certainly lost time in front of teachers. There's also been, I would think probably over the last 3 or 4 days, I received the question probably 20 times a day, are schools all closing down across the state after Thanksgiving? And you've probably heard that. Heck, you may have spread that. But I can tell you from our office that we have not advocated that. And in fact, we believe that you have the abilities, with operating within your phases to toggle back and forth. Many of you have done that. You drop back from a 3 to a 2, or in certain schools within your system, you've dropped from a 3 to a 2. And frankly, some people I know have gone from a 2 to a 3 within the last month as well. So I just want to let you know, we're not talking about anything or encouraging something like that, because we think the way our model works, it is working in terms of giving you that ability. Nor have I heard from the governor's office anything relative to that. So I just wanted to let you know that there's not some conspiracy behind the curtain that something's closing down in a couple of days. That's not true. We greatly appreciate what you all are doing to manage within your local communities based on your community spread, and we will be here to support that. Now, if there are shifts and we have to make shifts and something like that has to happen, then that would happen. But just wanted to kind of clear that up, that right now that is not a conversation that we're having anywhere at the state level. So I just wanted to confirm that out. So we have some bulletin updates today, and we'll start with Ms. Noel. We have, as I mentioned, we have accountability in the pandemic, and I believe, especially hearing some of the vaccine news that's recently been released, we have we should be thinking about what does this look like post-pandemic as well. But we have tried to make reasonable adjustments along the way, such as setting up and extended our second set of testing windows for your high school students and your 3A students, so that you would have more instructional time in front of the assessments. This year, value added is not part of the teacher evaluation. If in terms of observations of teachers, there's not the requirement for 2. I'm thankful that Bessie and Ms. Holloway and Ms. Bochet, who were here, supported the idea that if the first observation of the teacher was successful, then you would not have to follow that up with a second observation. Kind of frees the principal to focus attention either on COVID-related activities or on teachers who need the support the most. So if that first evaluation is successful, that second one is not required. And then the latest adjustment that we're bringing to you today for consideration is around CIR and UIR status and what might be done relative to that. And so we're going to present that to you today. Ms. Noel is going to do that. And then we will, based on that, of course, take this information onto the board. SAC is a committee, a council that helps inform Bessie. And so that's what we'll do with that today. So at this point, Ms. Noel, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Good morning. Sierra, I'm just taking us back to September when we were here to review the idea that for the 2021 school year, we would not have 2 consecutive years of state assessment data due to not testing in March of last year. Therefore, we needed a solution for how to handle the growth piece of the our accountability system. So at that time, we actually brought to you the research we had done in our department with the skip year model. And as you could tell from the last time we met, the correlation was very high in that model. So just to give you an indication of where that went from that meeting, at the October meeting, Bessie approved using that skip year model for growth in this year that we're in. And so one thing though that I did want to share with you, which I did share last when I made the presentation on the skip year model, was that we had the question of what would my SPS have looked like if you had taken my 2019 scoring and you had applied the skip year model to that particular score I already have. So we did that. We took your 2019 SPS, your actual score, and then we shifted into the skip year piece, our model with your score, and we posted the correlation, and that's what you see in this slide in front of you. And as you can see, we have a very high correlation coefficient, actually of 0.996, where 1 is a perfect correlation. So again, very high. Just wanted to bring this to you because we didn't have this slide for your September meeting. So another piece of the September meeting was just an announcement that with the skip year model, we would only be able to begin the growth calculations starting at grade 5 through 8 instead of starting at grade 4, as we traditionally have done in the growth model. So the question was posed from your group in September, what would this mean for K through 4 schools? And for K through 4 schools, there are 58 K through 4 schools in the state who have been, up until now, getting their own growth piece of the accountability score using their children. So now that 4th grade will not be a part of the growth model for this particular year, and 5th grade is where it starts, 4th grade will not have a 2021 one-year growth piece. But they do have their 18-19 year growth. And right now in policy, K through 3 schools gain their growth index from their feeder school. So we're going to take 18-19, we're proposing that we take the 4th grade, K through 4, 18-19 year that they have in play, it's in there. And it is averaged with 1 year of their feeder school. So that will become a recommendation for us. And I'm bringing that back to you because of the question that arose in September. And so I did promise to bring back an update to you in this meeting of where that policy is forming and what the recommendation is of it today. One other piece that I'm bringing a policy update to you on is CIR, UIR status, and I have Andrew with me. Andrew is my expert on explaining CIR and UIR. I'm going to open it up before we get to his slides, just with the idea of where we're headed in this particular school year, also with just the understanding that there are different categories that we fall into with UIR and CIR status. Of course, under UIR, you can go into the UIR status either from the academic side, which is where your subgroup would be in an F area or F scoring for 2 years in a row, and that becomes an urgent intervention setting. Or you can can also get there through the the D level, which is where your academic subgroups can be, your discipline subgroups can get you in trouble as well with UIR. So we're going to have some proposals here, and I'm actually going to ask Andrew to come up and go through these proposals with you and make sure that we're on the same page with us, and then to show you where we're going to have some options for opting into this label.
Good morning, everybody. Morning. The department certainly understands the situation you all are in this year academically, and given that we are proposing a CIR and UIR policy for this year that takes into consideration the monumental challenge that you have in front of you this year. So what we are proposing is that for this current academic year, the 2021 school year, schools that do not already have the CIR or UIR label will be held harmless from receiving that label, meaning that they will not earn the label this academic year if they do not already have it, unless they have earned the data such that they actually should get the label and the superintendent of that district actually opts into receiving that label. So superintendents who have schools that have earned the label based on data will essentially have a choice either to opt in to receiving that new label for their school, or if they do not opt in, the department will not apply a new label to a school that was not previously labeled a CIR or UIR. Simultaneously, any school that is currently labeled CIR or UIR and is on track to exit, which means in 2019 they met the data such that if they got one more year of data, they were ready to exit, we would exit those schools after this academic year if they met the data in this current year to exit. Because this is a hold harmless just for this academic year, we plan to use the data from this year and subsequent years for the purpose of determining CIR and UIR status, and we'll get into that in just a second. And this proposal will require federal approval as part of our state's ESSA plan. And so the United States Department of Education has released an addendum process for states to follow to amend their ESSA plans for this year to take into consideration proposals such as this, with a February 1st deadline. And so it is the department's intention to submit that addendum to the United States Department of Education with this proposal in mind. And this is a proposal that we presented earlier at the Accountability Commission and was endorsed by that commission. So for comprehensive intervention required, these are schools that have, yes?
I'm sorry, can we go back to that slide?
Sure.
I'm going to be missing something because 1 and 3, the first bullet and the third bullet seem to contradict each other. So help me understand. The schools not already identified will not be newly identified, but then accountability results from 2021 will be used in CIR, UIR determinations for the 21-22 school year.
So that is for the 21-22 school year. So what we are saying is in this year, there would be a hold harmless in place. Your data would not escalate a label unless you opted into it. But starting
That's
next,
what we're living right now.
right,
There's no,
current school
all right,
year,
so we know that.
right.
Okay.
But then starting in the 21-22 school year,
The data from this year
right,
will identify CIR, UIR.
will be part of the data that is used to identify. It would not be the sole use of data, but it would be data included in that determination.
Okay.
So in other words, Jeff, I'm sorry, Superintendent Powell, we
That's-
will not knock that data out. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It's just that it's not going to count in toward a.
Now, I just think I was thinking that the policy recommendation was the hold harmless was for the data that's going to come this year, but that's not the case. The hold harmless is for, we didn't test that last year, so we're hold harmless for this year. So when we test kids in the spring of this year, no matter whatever that data says, we're going to have schools identified CIR, UIR for the next school year.
Not necessarily. That depends on the data that would be earned in the next school year as well. And so the next set of slides that we have to present walk through which year
Okay.
we're proposing using
Let's
data.
look at the slides and then hopefully that'll clear that up.
Okay.
So for comprehensive intervention required, schools receive this label when a school has a graduation rate less than 67%, or when a school is a DRF for 3 consecutive years or 2 years for a new school. And so what this table is showing is that for the row that says 2021 label, this current school year we're in, we would not apply the label as part of a hold harmless unless the system opted into it based on their data from the 2018 SPS, 2019 SPS, and 2021 SPS. But then, one row down, starting with the 2022 SPS year, next school year, the data that would be used to consider that would be the 2019 school year, the 2021 school year, excuse me. And
It
the
won't be
2022.
released until the fall of 2022.
Correct.
Quick question, you're saying that it will become part of the 3-year average then,
Correct.
is what you're really saying.
That's correct.
Correct.
But if you don't have the 3-year average, if it was only this year that you dropped, so it's, if this was your 3rd year this year, it would be all harmless.
Correct. If this is the 3rd year in which you would have been escalated to a label for CIR, the department is proposing to not assign that
And then
label.
next year, if you don't qualify for CRUIR, then we won't go backwards and do it. But if next year,
Right.
you continue, it will be a 3-year average. So this year's part of the 3-year average, but it won't put you into CRUIR this year.
Correct.
Has to wait till next year to become part of your 3-year.
If you earned it based on those years of data.
That's correct.
Correct.
So for my own benefit, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little slow with some of this. So the fall, when I look at the left-hand column, and it says 2021 label, that's what's going to be released in the fall of 2021.
Correct. Based on this
Is
current.
yes
school year.
or hold harmless. Then what will be released in the fall of 2022, which is a whole another testing year away.
That's
Then
correct.
we're back on
That's correct.
the regular track of, okay,
Correct.
That's
okay,
correct.
gotcha.
Plus, it gives you like a 4th year to improve.
I got you. I think I understand
It
that.
gives you another year to really work on not getting the label.
To exit CR status, we are not proposing anything different. So for the 2021 year, the row that says 2021, this current school year, if the school met the exit criteria in 2019, which would have earned them the label on track to exit when we release those results, and they earn in 2021, this current school year, a C or better, that school would exit that status. And then, starting in 2022, the 2022 SPS, based on the 2021-2022 school year, again, we're not changing the policy here. We look at 2 years of consecutive data, and the 2 years of consecutive data we would consider would be the results from this year as well as the results from the next school year for exiting schools in the fall of 2022. We have 2 tables for UIR, one for academics and one for discipline, because there's different rules for what gets you on and what gets you off. So for academics, it's based on earning a subgroup performance score equivalent to an F for 2 consecutive years for any particular student group that we use to identify. And so what we are proposing is for this year again, if a school does not already have that UIR label for a particular student group, we would not apply that label, even if they had the data such that they should have earned it from this year, unless the superintendent opts into receiving that label. So again, it would be a choice for this year if you have the data such that you would have earned the label. To exit that status, again, we use 2 years of being non-identified, so being a D or better for that particular student group. And so for this current year we're in, we plan to look at data from the 2019 school year and the 2021 school year, this year we're in right now. And again, if you were on track to exit for a particular student group in 2019 based on that year's data, and you met the criteria again to exit this year, we would go ahead and remove that label for that particular student group. And then starting in 2022, with the fall of 2022 release, the data that we would consider would be from the 2021 release, this current academic year, as well as the results from next school year, 2022. I apologize, I know there's a lot of things that sound very similar. For discipline, what gets you on the list, what gets you on the label is 3 years of out-of-school suspension rates, more than twice the national average. And so what we are proposing is, again, for this year, what gets you on is your data from the 2018 SPS, 2019 SPS, and 2021 SPS years for discipline. But we would hold you harmless and not apply the label unless a school earned it and a superintendent opted into receiving it. And to exit, a school needs 2 consecutive years of a discipline rate less than twice the national average for out-of-school suspensions. And so for this current school year, we'll be looking at the 18-19 school year, as well as this current school year, the 20-21 school year. And then starting with the next school year, the 21-22 school year, we'll be considering the data from this school year as well as the data from next school year in determining that exit criteria. So just to recap very quickly, what we are proposing for accountability for this upcoming BESI meeting is a bulletin revision to Bulletin 111 regarding skip year growth to codify that in policy, a revision to the CIR and UR policy to add a hold harmless, because if we do not add that policy to Bulletin 111, there is nothing that allows us to do that. And because we need federal flexibility in order to implement these policies, the department is planning on submitting an addendum to the states as a plan to address these policies for federal approval such that we can actually apply them as part of the bulletin.
Do you have any questions of us?
We have Mr. Rosewell here.
Whenever it's appropriate. Could you put the slide back up on the UIR academic identification? Okay, so what we're saying is the data that we're going to get in this spring doesn't put you in, it'll be whole harmless for 1 year only.
Correct.
But the following year, say I have a school right now that's not in UIR. Okay, but this year, they get an app in that, say it's Spencer, or does. So, next year, they also get an app. We're gonna go back and recapture this year's data along with next year, so it will come next year. So it's really a 1 year suspension to put it in for this current year. But we are going to go back and recapture it, you're proposing anyway, in subsequent years. So it's not a true hold harmless, it's a 1 year suspension.
Or a 1 year waiver.
A 1 year waiver, but it will come back to be recaptured the following year. So it is going to count. It's not a true hold harmless, like, I don't know, like my idea of hold harmless.
Yes, ma'am.
It's
Correct.
suspended indefinitely.
Yes, ma'am. I think it's more about hold harmless from the label this year
Right.
than hold harmless from the data.
But it's going to count in the label for next year.
That's correct.
So it's gonna
Yes,
go back
that's
and
correct.
We're going to capture that.
It's a 1 year hold.
Yeah.
That's
But I'm
correct.
going to have to know that. I just want to make absolutely sure so that everybody understands it's not a true hold harmless in perpetuity. It is a 1 year suspension, so no one goes in as a result.
Correct. And we would certainly intend,
For the following year, and it counts.
correct, and we would certainly intend in any bulletin language that we bring to BESI, very clear
That's correct.
definitions
Right,
to
so
that.
it will count in identification and exit and everything, the following.
Yes.
Here.
My question is, will any considerations be given for schools that have about 25% of their population on full virtual and they do not show up for testing and they receive all zeros for them?
Okay, so we're looking now for options to support any type of student concern that, number one, if they're quarantined, we're looking at options for schools to use for that particular situation. Number two, if we have parents that are not comfortable with putting children in a class setting for testing, we're looking at options to support you there. We're also looking at additional testing windows even after, say, the December and January high school assessments. We're looking to open up even more time in the end of January to support students who just may have been ill or you're got so many different situations going on. At this moment, I can name a few of those. We're opening up to your district coordinators, test coordinators, the idea of really using the alternate site form as in any kind of situation that you feel comfortable using it, which would mean even in a church or a public area where parents are much more comfortable in taking their child for a scheduled test. We would also be very concerned at that point that the proctoring is done by someone who's received the test security training. That alternate site form, we're starting to really make sure people understand how it can be used. A second thing we're making sure everyone understands is that weekends are open to testing. That it's just not a Monday through Friday type of structure, because we've had some coordinators come to us asking if a parent was comfortable coming to the school on a Saturday when no one was there to test. Would it be allowed? And the answer to that is yes. A second thing, we're looking at a COVID-19 code that can only be used after spring testing for any situation that the correct documentation is in place. We think the documentation there, if it can't be a medical documentation, would be a series of signatures on that documentation. There are no zeros posted in the December testing because we get until spring for kids to test anyway. So there are no zeros applied in the middle of the year. We're opening up 2 dates in January after all high school testing is done. Those dates, and I think I have these correct, is the 28th is one of them. I don't know if that's a Friday or not. I don't have my calendar in front of me. It's either the day prior to that or right after that, depending on where the 28th falls. So again, that could be for any situation. If you have a 14-day quarantine that comes up during testing, then those dates are open for anyone. So that's where we are right now. We're not granting, quote, waivers in a sense at this time. We're looking more about how it looks at the end of things. There will be this idea of looking at participation after all testing is done, and whether or not we need to have some kind of preparation for the federal government around participation. We can't forecast what's going to be happening in the spring, so we're really trying to prepare for what that might look like and how we might go about handling it. We're very interested in the idea of not putting a waiver out right now. We don't want to signal that testing is not important, because we think it is important. But at the same time, we realize there are some supports that are needed, and I want you to know we're looking at those supports, and we're trying to walk through all of this and navigate this in a way we're all going to come out in a pretty good place at the end. The forecast for participation is looking better than it did, say, 2 months ago. We really want to watch this December, January testing event to see what participation ends up looking like, and then we'll be moving forward toward that. I know I didn't answer your question directly, but I'm trying to just really frame up where our options are falling right now and how we're trying to navigate the unknown structures as we move forward. Yes, sir.
Okay, so, and I'm going to try not to take too much time because I know that everybody's got a lot of stuff to do, but you did kind of answer some questions, and so, but it spurred more questions, honestly.
Sure,
So,
I'm sorry.
like we know that in the, going back to the Common Core year of testing, and we allow parents the opportunity to opt out. After that fact, we got, which is what I think I just heard you say, that the state looked at and kind of gave some situations. I think maybe it was like if 10% of your population didn't opt out of the test, then you didn't get a score or something that year. So is that what I just heard you say, that after?
Not exactly. I think what, we do have to hit a 95% participation rate right now.
Okay.
And so the question for us is, we don't want to try to guess on that, and we're not, quote, offering an opt-out.
Yeah, and I'm not asking you to do it, but what I heard you say is we've had situations like that before, and then the decisions were made at the end, so is that what you're saying? We're gonna play this thing out, because I think everybody in the room is doing everything they can to get people to come back to school.
I think the difference in what you're explaining, we didn't have a Common Core code where you could code out to children if you had documentation. We actually are looking for a COVID-19 coding structure where if you have documentation to support that this was due to COVID-19 structures, it's not going to be labeled a non-participation 0. So that's really different than where we were in Common Core times, because I lived through that and I know what you're talking about.
But the outcome may be the same. I think that's what we're kind of,
The outcome, I think, with a situation where we're listing it as a code could be more positive than where we were in the past with that idea. Statistically, we can't really tell where we're at right now until we've had that time pass.
completely respect that. So on the other point about this documentation for COVID, so unless I missed something, like have we received something from the
No.
state on how to code kids when they're, like, we came up with an absence code in Rapides Parish,
Yeah,
and so like, we feel like we're documenting that.
you are.
Okay.
So in every situation will be documenting differently.
So the state's not gonna say at some point,
No.
please use this code when documenting a student that's being quarantined?
Well, we will if we get to the spring assessment and we have a COVID-19 code. You'll have your test coordinators.
So there may be like some parameters that says, okay, if a child missed more than blank days of face-to-face instruction due to quarantining guidelines, something
No,
like
sir, it's
that.
more about when they go to test. If a student is not in the building to test, you
Oh,
have
just
to,
for testing?
for testing purposes, you
Ah.
have to code that child with a code in order to not receive a 0.
Okay.
It's
Then
for
I'll
this-
go back to what Carrie was saying.
It's for the assessment purpose only
Okay,
that I'm talking about a COVID-19 code.
okay.
And the documentation there would be a possible signature series where the test coordinator is signing it, you as principal are signing it,
Just for the testing.
just for
day
the
itself.
testing event.
Okay.
And I'm sorry if I was confusing you on that.
No, that's okay. I'm getting a lot of clarity. Not sure I agree with all of it, but I am getting a lot of clarity. And then the last one, and again, I do apologize. I think a lot of us were operating from an understanding, evidently incorrectly, that this year could be perceived as basically just a new baseline year, back to Doris' point about it being a true hold harmless for this year, and then we can move forward with the labeling post 2021. And again, there's a lot of assumptions there, vaccines, and that we're gonna start the next school year a little bit more like we used
I
to.
make that motion.
Yeah, so is there some reasoning behind not, I mean, maybe the ESSA got, I don't know, we just need to know, I think as superintendents, we need to know why we would not be approaching this year as just a true hold harmless into perpetuity, basically, and it become the new baseline for what student achievement and outcomes will be measured post this
Yeah,
testing.
it is an ESSA situation, because you have, in some instances, you have schools that already have 2 years of data that truly is positioning them in a way that the 3rd year could cause them to go to a CIR structure. I do not think ESSA will allow us to wipe everything off the plate and just start over new with a baseline. So this is more about, giving you a 4th year. This is really what this is about. Instead of in the 3rd year getting your CIR label, this is about giving you a year to really use to not get that label. That's really what this is about. And I think Superintendent Roche, I think the clarification of the terminology is what we're going to work on to make sure that that is cleaner. Hold harmless, we may be needing to say it's a 1-year suspension of the data. We need to talk about just where that wording falls, because if that is the understanding of what you had versus what you're hearing, we don't want that. We want to clear that up. And it is ESSA. Well, we are working with just a set of amendments right now that are COVID-19 related, which means that we will have to go in February with things that will be kind of lifted for 1 year in order to get through this structure.
Mr. Watson, I might add one thing. This idea of the hold harmless on a label, I agree, we probably need to clarify that a little bit, but this is something that came to us when we met in North Louisiana with the superintendent's group. It's something that I heard around the label. We meet weekly around accountability issues that are coming to us, so everything that you're sharing. I mean, I think we actually meet today. I think that's so we'll continue to think through all of this stuff. The other thing I think that is pretty important is we don't know what guidance might be coming from USDOE, and we tend to believe a lot of these questions we may have further clarity on as we get into the spring, because we do anticipate some level of changes and shifts, and so we'll be pushing these questions up as well.
Dave?
The bottom of page 6, or the bottom of slide 8, I want to go back to Bochet's comment, and also Jeff Kroger, just to get sure I understand it, okay? So in 2021, by the subgroup is Dear Health, I will not receive the urgent intervention needed. That's a current year. Is that
So,
correct?
the current proposal right now is for comprehensive intervention required and urgent intervention required. It is not a proposal for urgent intervention needed. Schools that are identified as urgent intervention needed are not required to submit an improvement plan for ESSA.
So we're really not doing hold harmless or waiving data. We're waiving labels, is what we're doing. We're suspending labels for you. So that label is not suspended or waived for the 2021 school year.
It's the two on the end.
Okay, so then, and that clears up something for me there. So we will receive an urgent intervention needed label in 2021, is what I'm hearing you say.
And the urgent intervention needed label essentially serves as a warning to a warning label, because it is not, there's no hard stakes attached to it in terms of a requirement from the federal government to pursue an action plan.
So in the urgent intervention required, the UIR, if in 17, 18, and 18, 19, because I didn't do a 19, 20. In 17, 18, 18, 19, we were an F. And I'm talking about on the academic side. And then in 2021, we're also an F. That's the year you're going to suspend the label coming down.
So we are proposing suspending new labels for schools that haven't already earned that label. So
So I would have to have 2 previous years of F data for you to even need to suspend the label.
That's correct.
So a school that was an F for a student group in 17, 18, 18, 19 would have earned the UIR label for that student group, and we're not proposing just wiping that away because that is based on accurate data from those school years.
Okay?
And so that label would persist. If in this current year, they were above an F, we would label them on track to exit like we historically have done, because the current policy is 2 years of consecutive data exiting that status.
Correct.
But for a school that had not yet earned that label for student group, we would not apply a new label this year.
So that brings me to this question. If this school year became the 3rd year, I wouldn't receive the label suspended. But next year, if we're not an F, I am going to receive the label next year because I have 2 years of being out.
So once a school's earned the label, they essentially keep the label until they met the exit criteria to have the label removed. So once a school met it, like in 17, 18, and 18, 19, it doesn't go away until they can demonstrate 2 consecutive years of data to have the label removed.
But that's my question, is if this school year gives me another F where I would have received the label, but you suspended it, and then next school year I don't have an F,
You would be on track to exit.
You would be
that
on-
then I would get the label and I would get it on track to exit.
Correct.
You would not get an, you're an urgent intervention needed,
But
so.
now, I'm talking about urgent intervention required. I guess I would be an urgent intervention needed.
Yes, you would.
And I've been there for 2 years.
Yes, and you
And
would
then this
continue.
year, take COVID out of the picture, I'm still there, then you would give me the urgent intervention required label. Okay? In the normal world, not in our COVID world.
Yes, in your normal world.
I would get the urgent intervention required label.
But in the
But in the
new,
COVID world, you're gonna suspend that label for me this
Yes.
year, right? And then next year, regardless of what happens, that label's coming on.
No, if you're an urgent intervention needed in 17-18, also in 18-19, we didn't have data in 19-20.
Right?
In 2021, if you earn that label, it's not added to you.
Okay.
In 21-22, now I'm picking back up on your chart here. 21-22,
Which that release will be in the fall of 22.
Correct.
It would count, it would use that data for 2021.
Correct.
I mean, I would have 3 years.
Third year data.
I would have 3 years, those 3 years would be 17, 18, 18, 19, 20, 21. You held the label back from me in 2021, but I did have 3 years of data. In the normal world, I would have been labeled in 2021. And then in 21, 22, I'm coming out, and you would say I'm face to exit. So I'm asking, are you gonna give me a label with a on face to exit?
okay, I'm going to answer that and then Andrew can clean me up if I'm wrong. Okay, but it's, once you get to 21-22 school year, the 3 years that count for you would be your 18-19, your 20-21, and your 21-22.
So I can't get the label.
That's correct. Now, Andrew's got to correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my interpretation because your 3 years of data are
And the thing to clarify here is that for CIR, for a letter grade, it is based on 3 years. But for UIR, for academics, it's 2 years. And that's the current policy in place right now. It's always been that way since that. So for CIR schools that are not new, it is a 3-year window of data we look at. But for urgent intervention required for academics, it is in fact a 2-year window, not a 3-year window.
so it would be,
The window for identification is shorter for UIRA than it is for CIR, and that has been the case since SR.
go back to your UIRA entry. So for 22, you would need 21 and 22 data. But you were never in CIR, you were just in needed.
And we are obviously certainly happy to work with any and all of you after this meeting.
I'm a little concerned about all
We'll
the
have
side
some
work
one-on-one.
going
They just need to meet with me and Dave.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, and that being said, Ms. Doris has a question.
Just one quick one. Okay. Back to somewhat David's example. Say in 2019, I got my first one. So in 2019, urgent intervention needed.
For a student group, right?
For student support.
Correct, you would be urgent
So I'm in
intervention needed.
need. I get to 2021, I still have an F, so I don't move to urgent intervention required.
Correct.
Right. But then 2022, I get another F. So now I've got 3 years of the F because you're going back and capturing 2021. So I then go from needed, I bypass urgent intervention required, I go straight to comprehensive intervention required.
Incorrect. So for a,
Yeah,
so,
well, that's what your sample is, because it's 3 years. You went from needed in 2019 to not getting your required urgent intervention required label in 2021, because you hold harmless for that year. But in 2022, when you get your third F, you don't go to urgent intervention required. If you go back and capture your 2021, you got 3 years of it out. You're saying you go to comprehensive intervention required immediately.
but that clause in Bulletin 111 about a 3-year escalation is 3 years of receiving the label, not the data. So even though a school earned the data in this current school year, that policy applies to the years in which you earn a label, not.
So then you don't wait till the fourth
Correct.
for that
Correct.
CIO.
Correct.
Okay. I would just ask you to consider, because this is getting very confusing. I would ask you to consider a scenario where we still test this year, obviously, because I think we need to have some kind of information as to where kids are. But that we would try to put a proposal to USDOE, that we have a true hold harmless on any of these consequences based on the 2021 test. not necessarily a new baseline, because you're not going to throw out what came before. I mean, we still have data from how the school was before, but that we would not continue to look at consequences and such until we get that next year's data, so that 2021 will be a true hold harmless in every respect. That we use it for information for the schools. We are publishing the data so that the public can have that information, and we use it to inform our progress going forward, so that we would have a true hold harmless in terms of consequences for the 2021, the testing cycle for this year. Just to kind of consider that in the different scenarios that y'all are looking at.
Right, we can certainly consider that, and we can certainly commit right now to engaging with the United States Department of Education to explore what flexibilities are feasible. The communication we have received to them thus far is that they're only entertaining flexibility for this current school year. That may change in the future under a potential new administration, so we will keep exploring all avenues possible.
Flexibility for the current school year could include the flexibility of not considering this data in future labels.
That has not been our impression in engaging with them, but we will continue to revisit the
I would
conversation.
ask that you do so.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I think we all second that, right?
Well, I think we appreciate the opportunities of this year, but the concern is the impact of this year on the following years.
So just for clarity, then what you would see under 2021 would be a complete hold harmless with no yeses. Is that what you're saying, Superintendent Boucher?
That's what I'm asking.
Yes, that's what we'll
That
explore.
we'll continue to use the data to inform instruction, that we publish our data, that we let everyone know how it is.
Yes,
But that we are not using it for consequences within the ESSA plan, that it is a true waiver of consequences for this year, but that we still go ahead and test them.
and nor will we use it in future year decisions.
And it's not, right, it's not
Okay.
used.
We're going to explore that
Here, here.
and see if that's going to be an allowable structure for us. Thank you.
Dr. Dillon.
Unless you are on track to exit,
Yes.
right? Don't hold me another year,
We don't want the good.
right? Just let me be able to exit.
Yeah. No, we probably still have several questions about this, but for the sake of moving on anyway, I would like just clarity on one piece of that. And so we have the option of accepting a label. For clarity of why would ever want to accept a label? Would that be because of the resources
Yes, sir.
and
That would
supports they go with
be,
it?
yes, sir. There are some federal dollars tied to that.
This,
Yes, sir. It's to support with resources.
that would not be available if you're not in that.
That's correct.
All right. So, we good? A motion, we have a motion to receive. So are there any alternate motions to that?
I think that, just kind of echo what James was saying, we received the report. I mean, obviously, it's not necessarily an action item, I suppose, but I say we received the report with the recommendation that Superintendent Boucher suggested that we ask administration to push this up the line to US DOE to see what other options we have on that hold harmless piece for the 2021 data.
So we see a motion to accept it.
So, I mean, we can make a motion just to receive it, but
I'll make a
if
motion.
there's something that we would like to add to, we would like to add something to that motion to say we want to encourage the department to.
I'll make a motion that we receive recommendations with considerations of changes that could be made to what we just received.
Can we capture what that is? Because, it needs to be in writing what those changes would be. So pursue,
Data not be used in the future for.
Yeah, so receive
with
the
the
current motion
DOE.
The data and the label be held harmless.
with the idea that this current year, this year's data, we know it's not going to, the label is being waived, but not to be used in the future year, right? right? This really goes to a skip year.
With
That's what we're asking.
with eligibility to exit.
Right, but yes, but we would like to, we'd like to retain the opportunity to exit if our data this year.
I was expecting to have a better year this year, but if we did some of those.
If you are lucky enough to, yeah. Obviously, nothing leaves that this still has to be approved by the feds, and so, and there's still revisions to the Bulletin 111 has to happen, so.
Well, that's how I'm capturing it, to pursue with the USDOE the option to waive the data and label, or to be held, data and label, what would it be then? The data and label for what? For CIR, UIR? And with the eligibility to exit.
Fair enough. So, I have a motion for Mr. Williams, second, Howell.
Is everybody?
Yeah. All in favor? All right, any opposed? Anybody? All right, that motion carries. Thank you for diving into that with us. And I'm sure we'll be plugging you some more. We'll have some smaller groups, I'm sure, would like to work. All right. 3.2, consideration of an update report regarding the LDE's accountability research agenda. Dr. Brown.
Motion to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
Yes.
Motion, Dr. Gilfredo.
Second.
Second, Ms. Ebor. Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. First of all, thank you for the discussion around that item. It gives us some more information to go back and think through and have additional conversations. So that was a good level of deliberation. I appreciate it. So as I mentioned, we will, I believe, prayerfully, be post-pandemic at some point. And we believe that, we have a strong accountability model, but we also want to have the opportunity to improve things if we think that they should be improved. And when you're thinking about ways to improve, one of the things that means a lot to us as a team is not necessarily coming to this group or coming to Bessie or coming to accountability, coming to this group or coming to the Accountability Commission and saying, here's the plan, here's what we want to do, just endorse it. We really wanted to spend time thinking about some of the challenges that exist, what's working, what are some areas for improvement. And so over the last, whatever time in my professional life, but also over the last 5 or 6 months in this position, I've heard from many of you, I've heard from other stakeholders who aren't superintendents about opportunities for us to explore and to look at issues relative to the accountability model that might help strengthen that model in terms of student outcomes. So, that is what we're trying to do, recognizing that anything we talk about, anything that we discuss, we can't just flip a switch and make that happen tomorrow. So we need ample time ahead of that to research that. We need ample time to have conversations with people, to build out plans for it. And so you might say, well, we're in a pandemic. Why are we even talking about this? Well, I think that we're going to be post-pandemic, and I don't want us to be behind, and I want us to go ahead and start having some of these conversations. And frankly, I shared with Superintendent Boucher before the meeting, any opportunity I get to talk about education that's not COVID, I really enjoy. And so the conversations that are the ideas that we share with you today, they're just about helping us frame a research agenda of where we might need to go in further exploration. I'll have to have a ton of conversation with Bessie members on any of these directions. But the role of this group, like Accountability Commission, is to help inform Bessie. And so that's why I'm bringing some of this to you today, and not as this is final, this is what the department believes, this is what Katie Brumley believes, but these are areas we've heard, these are areas that we think are worthy of further discussion. And so that's where we are today, and that's what I tried to explain from this slide. So some notable achievements over the past decade. We have seen improvement in our state in terms of more students that are graduating than ever before. We know that every high school student has the opportunity to take the ACT. That did not previously happen. We know that we have high-quality academic standards. It's not listed, but the state has done a tremendous amount of work on curriculum and high-quality curriculum. We know that more and more students have been introduced to expanding career and technical pathways based on the opportunities within your local system. I shared with you at your conference the 6 critical goals of the agency. I shared with you the trend data over the last few years on these critical goals, and we even took the time to break it out based on your own individual school districts and where you stand on these items and your trend data over the past few years. And I did encourage new superintendents to consider that as maybe a framework for how they invest in strategic planning in their system, if they're looking for some key areas that might make sense for strategic planning, or superintendents who just feel like they want to engage in that within their system. It might be an opportunity for some particular areas for you to explore. Also, I want to let this group know that in terms of just these ideas and considerations we're exploring today, I did have the opportunity to meet with your board officers last week to walk through this, and included Dr. Joseph in that because she's on the Accountability Commission as well. And we just talked through some of these items, and I can tell you, where we were as a department, 3 or 4 weeks ago has been further refined with each conversation we've had with individuals or superintendents or other stakeholder groups, and DESE, in fact. And so what kind of I'm presenting today is just where we are in present form of things that we believe are worthy of discussion at this point. So the first critical goal, 1, and I'm gonna run through these fairly fast because I shared these with you at your superintendent's conference a couple of weeks ago, has to do with kindergarten readiness. The next one has to do with mastery rates for at the end of 3rd grade in ELA math, ELA 46, math 43. Next is 8th grade mastery rates in ELA and math. Probably the most alarming there than just the numbers overall is that drop that we see in mathematics between the end of 3rd grade and the end of 8th grade. Students graduating on time as a cohort, seeing tremendous improvement across the state in all of our systems in this area over the last few years. Looking at career and college credentials, you see about half of our students receive a basic or advanced credential, and then eligibility for TOPS, about 60% of students were eligible for a TOPS award in 2019. This is just some of the public rankings of where we stand in EdWeek, US News and World Report, and our NAEP rankings. This is an interesting slide that I shared with the Accountability Commission a few days ago. This is the relationship between current SPS and levels of students who are economically disadvantaged within that particular school. And so what you see is the negative correlation between the school's SPS and the SPS and their economically disadvantaged. This indicates that economically disadvantaged students, that number may be predictive of SPS. A school that serves a larger percentage of economically disadvantaged students is predicted to do worse in SPS than a school serving a smaller percentage of economically disadvantaged students. I mean, I know many of you have felt that before, but we wanted to spend some time and explore that and look at that and see, how does that pan out if we actually pull that data. And so this is what we find. Distribution of letter grades. Also, information I thought would be informative. When we look at just letter grades of A and B together, and we look at K-8 schools, we see that about 40% of K-8 schools have an A or B ranking, but we know that number is much higher in our high schools, almost around 70% in our high schools, and then combination schools too is also higher. So basically, what you see is that the high schools across the state have a higher SPS than what we see in elementary and middle schools. And again, you probably felt that within your own system, and I just want to share that that's consistent across the entire state. Why accountability matters, it does signal to our school systems what matters the most, and as school leaders, we know that. We know that these are the things that are measured, and so these are the areas where we go in and we give attention and interest. It incentivizes actions that we take with our students. It rewards outcomes that improve students' lives. It informs the public of school quality and effectiveness, and it guides family decisions around choice. So in many of the ways that you have thought about this year and the results and the conversations that we just had, we think it's also, we think about our opportunity right now in that same way of where are some areas where we have a chance to, because we did not test last year, because we are in a unique year, that we should begin some further exploration. And so some considerations. The first is just bridging the early childhood performance profiles and 312. If you look at our 4th grade NAEP results, you see our rankings. We are, we all know this. We're behind some of the other states. We have our state rankings, but I really like this ruler that our team put together, and it does correlate with what you all have passed out as your priorities for student outcomes in terms of having all students reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. So we have early childhood performance profiles, and then we know that once 3rd grade hits, students begin their battery of LEAP assessments. But we have this period in K2 where we have a vacuum and we don't have an accountability model in place in these areas. And one of the reasons, and I've tried to talk to people throughout the state about why. We've talked to some people nationally about why. One of the main things that comes up is just trying to figure out, what is developmentally appropriate for a kid in K2. As caring educators, I don't think any of us want to take a 5-year-old and say, here's your week-long LEAP test. But at the same time, we know that having some level of measurement in K2 is important. And so what we think might bridge that gap, and again, the things that we're sharing today aren't like final, they're just like some of our thinking around this, is if we combined approaches that happen within that pre-K performance profile with what is already happening in your system with some literacy work and moving towards that ultimate 3rd grade LEAP. So the first would be having a sense of student literacy, ensuring our youngest learners are on track by the end of 8th grade to be on that mastery level. Build on the required annual developmentally appropriate literacy screener in K2 to include an end-of-year measure. So thinking about maybe having a beginning of the year literacy assessment or screener, and then having one at the end of the year that has the opportunity to measure the growth of the child over that period of time. It's really important for our team too. I mean, many of us are just coming out of systems, and so it's really important for us to, that whenever we think about this, that we're not adding additional stuff and adding additional work. So we know that some literacy screeners, are already required, and so we're just trying to figure out, can there be some way to standardize that so that it can be used in this process and isn't an additional thing that schools are having to do. But the second part is maybe an expansion of the class rubric that measures that teacher-student interaction, and it measures classroom quality. So if we could have a way to measure that teacher-student interaction, the things that the class measures, and then somehow couple that with a basic literacy screener at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, we might have put together some product that would work so that we would have some form of accountability model in K2. The next item is looking at 3.8 ELA and social studies assessments. I heard from a few of you that you felt like that worked well for you this past time whenever you were able to use this. And the whole idea around this, and this has been work that's happened in the department over the last couple of years, is trying to figure out a way to integrate the social studies content into the ELA assessment. And so assessments are designed right now. This is what we presently do. Assessments are designed to be content agnostic while focusing on grade level standards. Assessments may use passages that include experiences and vocabulary that students may have never encountered. You know, that is that piece around cultural bias and testing and what that vocabulary might look like on that test if a student hasn't had those levels of exposure. And then research showing that reading requires both skill and background knowledge, meaning that students are better able to comprehend what they read when they possess knowledge of that subject. This means that assessments are implicitly measuring knowledge, placing those who have fewer life experiences at a disadvantage. So looking forward, one of the ideas that we have is just capturing and building upon some of the work that's already been happening at the department around the innovative assessment idea. But if we want students to study books and text deeply and improve their reading ability, our assessments must explicitly measure knowledge. This will encourage teachers to focus on knowledge building and ensure that students have the background knowledge required for their assessments. So if we're able to do some form of integration between the social studies and ELA, instead of having, and someone actually brought this particular idea up to us whenever we met with your board officers, but instead of having that end of year, one day, one test type feel for students, over that course of that week, however you have that window, you would have briefer assessments throughout the course of the year that was based on the actual content that you had been most previously teaching in the classroom. And our other hope around that would be that we could turn those results around quickly. I mean, all of this is hopeful if that all worked, but you could turn those results around quickly and they would actually be instructive for the teacher. So the teacher would actually be able to see, okay, these are where the kids are, these are some of the adjustments I might need to make moving forward, as opposed to now, you know, we have this period of time after the kids move on to the next level, the teacher never sees them again whenever we actually get results back. So it focuses, well, teachers can focus on instructional and background knowledge and making meaning of full text. And also, you know, I think it's important equity conversation just because all students have the opportunity to develop background knowledge together around what's going to be assessed, so that no student is at a disadvantage due to lack of the life experience, because what they're reading on the ELA, for instance, is what they have just studied maybe in their social studies classroom. If we were able to move down this path, and look, there's a lot of work that would have to happen. This is the current grades 3 through 8 assessments. So you see 4 assessments per grade level. In 3 through 8, you end up with a total of 24 assessments, and that's 5,335 total minutes of testing for a kid in grades 3 through 8. If we were able to, you know, if we wanted to do this, if we made that happen, this is a potential look at what this could look like. And on this slide, and I'm not sure that we're sold out on this at all, but having the science every other year is also a possibility. But you would drop down maybe to 15 assessments, and you'd have 4,600 minutes of testing, which would reduce a time that a kid tested from their 3rd grade to 8th grade year by 735 minutes, which is, I think, about 12 hours of testing over the course of that time. Carol, can I just run through? Yeah, and I'm going to ask Dr. Chasson also to come up whenever we get to the end. Transitioning to high school, during a student's elementary and middle school years, the focus of the accountability system is on both year-over-year progress and helping students master grade level content. When students enter high school, the focus shifts on preparing them for success after graduation. We're offering considerations to help improve the career and college readiness of our graduates. These are current outcomes. If you look at cohort graduation rate, this is the area that we spoke to earlier where we've seen such a growth in our kids. I was actually surprised by the bottom number, the college enrollment rate. It has basically stayed the same between 2013 and 2019, and that includes your 2-year post-secondary as well as your 4-year post-secondary institutions. Just looking at strength of diploma, looking at work we might do around ACT, first being strength of diploma. just for everyone's information, there are 4 different groups really that have been exploring dual enrollment in AP and IB and CLEP over the last year. One is the work and the recommendation, frankly, of Bessie and Board of Regents from last December when they created a joint goal beginning with the freshman class of 2025 that all Louisiana Public High School graduates will complete high school with college credit and/or career technical, post-secondary credential value, or both. And then also we know over the last year plus, I guess, the dual enrollment task force has been meeting. You have representation on that task force. And the dual enrollment task force put out a summary document recommending that each high school student have the opportunity to enroll in at least 4 dual enrollment courses before graduation, and that the accountability system provide corresponding incentives that reflect the need for career and college readiness. And then this past legislative session, the regular session, Representative Brass was able to pass one of his bills, it was Act 204, that said the availability of dual enrollment, advanced placement, IB, or any combination thereof in core academic areas in all high schools is critical. Moving forward, and I know many of you say, well, of course, that's what we're already doing, but I want us together to really think even more intentional, more deliberately around that 4-year high school block of time, that 4-year experience about really being about what is next for the kid, and then how can we be really intentional in creating those pathways. And in that, with that, we want to also put out an opportunity where we're asking you, if you choose, if you would like to, it's not a mandatory thing, but if you would like to, we're going to put out a possibility for you to be able to coordinate, and we'll tie some funding to this so that you can have potentially have some dollars to help with this. But if you'd like to meet with the post-secondary institution in your area, whether it's a 2-year, whether it's a 4-year, or maybe it's someone that you work with virtually, if you're in a rural community, and you'd like to think more about what junior and senior year could look like for some of your students, that you would have the opportunity to plan out within your own system what some pathways could be. When we think about Jumpstart, it's really a next level or an extension of what's presently happening in Jumpstart. Right now, I think 42% of high school seniors in our state have a full academic load, so only about 4 out of 10 are at school all day. We know that had over 40,000 graduates, and 300 of those graduated both with a high school degree and an associate's degree. There's workforce data coming out, happy to share that with you, that shows even a few years ago, the entry point for work was the high school diploma, but now what's happening is the entry point of work for a student beyond high school is really having a credential or having an associate's degree or having some form of a 4-year degree. So really thinking about that. So we'll be putting out some information, for districts who would like to participate, even are concerned or curious about this, partnering with people at universities or institutions locally and kind of mapping out what that junior or senior year could look like, maybe in lieu of some of the things you're doing now to help more students be on that pathway to graduate with an associate's degree or with some state recognized apprenticeship program. Wanted to flag this for everyone. This is current strength of diploma. We know different points obviously are assigned for different things happening. And this says sample, so this is not necessarily what we have to do, and I know a lot of additional conversations would have to take place, and we have equity considerations and a number of things, but just looking at maybe having a pathway where you're not telling the system, okay, you have to do enrollment, you have to do AP, you have to do IB, you have to do CLEP. Because I know many of you feel differently about those different things, and you've got structures for different things. Some of you are AP people, some of you are dual enrollment people, some of you do CLEP. I know all that. Some of you have IB high school. But if students earn a certain amount of hours, they would then have a corresponding amount of points that it would earn for your system. So if you earn 6 hours, and you get this many points if you're 12. And we might could even have variations on both sides of that. But again, but also at the end, associate's degree, really trying to incentivize that, or that statewide advanced plus credential, or the full apprenticeship. But what I was about to say is, again, this is not saying, hey, this is the way this has to happen. What I'm trying to prompt with you, and we're not going to solve all this today, and I certainly want to have follow-up conversations and hear from you if you want to provide input, but thinking about ways that we can be more intentional in when kids finish that 12th grade year, being ready to do that next thing, and looking back at this and saying, well, how does this limit that from happening? And while we know that we have, nearly 70% of our high schools that are A, we have much less that are elementary middle schools that are A, and this is good if you're a high school. I think as educators, we should really pause and think about, does this particular model of awarding points actually promote the outcome that we want for our kids when they do graduate high school? Next is ACT, just providing some information, and I'll start by sharing information on the 6 LEAP 2025 tests, formerly EOCs, that we give. You can see the unsat number, you have it in front of you, but you see the unsat numbers all the way up to advanced on all of the 6 current tests that we provide in our high schools. This is a look at our ACT score over the past few years. We do continue to see that decline. We know that our latest number was our lowest number. But if you look below, I think what's important is the written words below. So we had almost 7,000 kids in 2018, 2019 that had the coursework for TOPS, and they had the GPA for TOPS, but they didn't have the ACT. So 7,000 students across our state missed out on that opportunity to access college, whether it's, I'm not assigning fault to that, I'm just saying about 7,000 students missed out on that opportunity to access college, which could have been a game changer for their life, because they didn't have that ACT score. They had coursework, they had the GPA, but they just missed out on that ACT score. So ACT, this is the content that is explored or is assessed in ACT. One of the things we've talked about before is just the ACT measuring grammar, and that's not really spending a lot of time in our high schools looking at grammar. And so, are we necessarily setting kids up to be successful on ACT if we're not investing some time covering some of the content that's actually assessed? And so, I believe however we get around to it, and how we ultimately together decide is the way to help make some improvements in this area, that we have to do a better job of setting students up to actually be successful on it whenever they go into that test day. And frankly, I think, and this becomes a cost issue and a time issue, but one of the things we also know is that students who take it multiple times do better. And if we had a pre-ACT or something like that as an opportunity, that would be helpful for kids, and also provides an inventory for career interest and college interest that could be helpful to your school counselors over that 4-year experience in high school. Distribution of ACT scores across the state. So the most common ACT score is a 14. So of all the students that take the test, the most common score that we see is a 14. And you see most of the students range in our state, basically, depending on how you break that down, but somewhere between 13, 17, 13, 18. SRAB put out this report, and I wanted to share with you. So the bottom line has to do with students meeting all 4 readiness benchmarks on ACT. And from 14 to 18, we're around 15% of our kids hit all 4 of those benchmarks for readiness on ACT. Our graduation rates have increased, so between 14 and 18, they've moved from 75 to 81%. But what exists, and in fact what has grown, is this readiness gap of students who are graduating from high school, which is good, but meeting those 4 benchmarks on the ACT to be considered ready for college and ready to persist through college. So we see that readiness gap growing, which, you know, is not what we want to see. This is subgroup information on those 4 benchmarks for readiness. Then interests and opportunities, you know, we've kicked around interests and opportunities for several years. Basically, we know that we have to continue to look at interests and opportunities, but if you'll go to the orange on the screen, it may not be orange on your, I don't know if you have black or white, but one of the things that we're offering maybe as a consideration, we've talked a good bit about the community service endorsement over the last few months. Now students can earn the community service endorsement on their diploma if they get the hours at any point during their high school experience. And so maybe there's an opportunity to wrap community service somehow into the high school piece of interest and opportunities. I don't know, but it's a possibility. And the other thing is STEM. We've heard from middle schools that on the STEM piece, because course enrollment is only valued in physical education, visual arts, performing arts, and world languages. And some schools have invested in STEM pathways that's not of value for that part of the interest and opportunity. So it may be an opportunity for us to include STEM as an acceptable part of that interest and opportunities framework. So again, just want to reiterate, we're simply looking at data, simply looking at where we are, trying to think about what is a more comprehensive accountability model. You know, what role does and should equity play in that model, and knowing that if we make any shifts, it's going to take some time to do that so that we can help get that right, and knowing that I value, you know, what you all think and feel about these things. And so that's why I'm trying to get some of this out here, just so we can begin some level of conversation around it, and certainly welcome feedback. We're not solving this today. We're not solving this next month. We're not solving it the month after, but I did want to go ahead and put just some of the data points out there that are concerning, and some of the areas where we might be able to give some additional attention. And you know, you work with the board every day, and so I also have to work with our board to make sure that they're informed, that they have the research that they need for anything that we ask them to consider. And part of that, frankly, is, you know, your viewpoints on this, and so that's why I'm here today, trying to explore that with you. Mr. Watts, I don't know that I want to go into any form of in-depth conversation just because our time is limited, but we can certainly touch on some of the high points if you want.
Maybe take a couple of questions.
Yeah, and Dr. Chasson, if you don't mind.
I can send my question on.
You want to say it all? Okay. Thank you, Kerry. Appreciate that. I mean, I'm sure some of these questions are going to be asked. Like I said, there is a time. This is not happening tomorrow.
Yeah, and also, Mr. Watts, too, like, if you want to talk more about any of it in particular, or if you have any questions or thoughts, or hey, we should consider this or that, like, call us, email us, whatever works, we're happy to take it. So I'm not trying to stop the discussion today. I'm just trying to be sensitive to everybody's time. I know it's a lot.
Any just burning questions? And I have a thought I'd like to share real quickly, but anybody?
Well, I'd like to just ask, when are there going to be opportunities where we can have these conversations with all superintendents, not just, you know, obviously there are opportunities, but there's a lot, I think that's very positive moving forward, but, and I know you all value the opportunity for feedback, so when are those opportunities to come before?
Yeah, and like I said, we will set that up, because, you know, where we have, you know, 7, 8 items here, we may say, you know what, we really think these are the most important things, and so let's talk about these things that we can get done together. But we're just laying that out, but we'll set forth the process for that.
And so for me, and following this throughout, I do have some questions, but can I make a motion? Chairman, my motion would be that to endorse the K2 piece. That's part of what we talked about in our last conference. That we endorse that, but there are questions about the rest of it, I think, that we would like further discussion. And I don't mean everything's perfect about the K2 piece either, but it's also still in the development stage. But we like the K2 piece. Again, I mean, there are some questions, you know, in terms of the points that are allocated for certain levels on your diplomas, and based on what the strength of the diploma. You know, I have some questions about that, but I think we can get to later. So the thought would be to endorse the K2 aspect of this, but then to further research and ask and investigate the ACT, and in the high school piece of it.
Mr. Watts, it felt like they're just for the group, so you'll know, we had an accountability commission earlier in the week, and an accountability committee, just so you know how they handled it, and Dr. Joseph can share too, but I believe they endorsed K2, also integrated assessments, but in concept for us to signal that we come back with more information, so they endorsed the idea in concept. And then for the other pieces, they said, hey, we would just like some more research on that. So I'm not sharing that to inform how you know, but I just want you to know what they said.
So, I mean, Dr. Joseph, we're in line with that, we feel, with
Yes,
this.
it was just about getting more information and, yeah, like Dr. Brumley said, just in concept, but not any, like, finalized, this is what's gonna happen, because there are questions around class, there's questions around the types of assessments that will be given to, you know, children in those grade levels.
So feel free to shoot me down. Okay, go ahead, Ken.
Just real quick, and I didn't see it addressed here, but in regards to High School Week 2025, is that also going to be included in part of the study in context of the ACT correlation between those things as well as part of this discussion?
Yeah, so they, that was actually one of the requests from Accountability Commission, that we bring back information, research, whatever you want to call it, around both ACT and EOC.
And what, I'm sorry.
EOC and ACT. I'm sorry, I should not say EOC, leave 2025.
So, would anybody like to make a motion at this point?
To receive the
I think
report?
what he's asking for is to receive the report and endorse the concept of K2 and integrated assessments and encourage further research to the ACT and NEET. Anybody want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion, but can I make this point? So I think that we all need to, I know, be very tactful in how I say this. I know that in previous years, information would be given to us, and basically that's what it was, right? I mean, they would listen, but at the end of the day, this is what it was. This is now changed, and we have to change our mindset with that, and that this information is not complete. This is just research. This is us moving forward to say, yes, we're interested in knowing more, we're interested in making the changes, and that it's authentic feedback that the department is going to take, that we have the opportunity to really have a voice in this, instead of something that is passive. Does that make sense? So I think it's a good thing that we are in a position where our voices are truly heard, and that decisions have not been made at all about anything. But what the decision has been made is that they're willing to listen to us. And I think that's a really good thing. And that's how I felt on the Accountability Commission. When we had the meeting, there were no finalized things, there were no points awarded, there was none of those things. It was just about collecting information and hearing what you have to say. So it's a refreshing feeling, and you have to change your mindset on now how information is given to you and provided for you. So I want to thank Dr. Brumley and everyone at the State Department for making that huge shift.
So do we have a second?
Second. Ken, you go with Ken.
I'll make sure I know what I'm fixing to do.
So what we're just approving, the motion is to endorse the concept of the K2 piece. The idea of researching and trying to find a developmentally appropriate assessment for K2. So the concept of that. And then the idea that we're going to continue the research on the ACT and the high school piece. Like, in other words, what Kaylee said, that there's going to be more discussion, that there's going to be more time put into this before we roll out that part of the
In the integrated assessments and which
Yes.
so that it's really what, for 3 bullets back on slide 36. We're on page.
K2 bridge. Yeah, and the, okay, yes.
And what's the modification, is there a modification with everyone saying, and you just take those three bullets?
No, it was to further research those.
So, Mr. Watts, what is your feeling around why you would want to pull just one section out and endorse rather than endorsing, as Mr. Alexander said, the 3 bullet points, knowing that all of this is going to be further researched, and as Dr. Joseph said, our voices are going to be heard. So would we not want to endorse all of this, knowing that it's going to continue to be researched? And that's just a question, I don't have a specific
And I'm all,
answer.
my whole point of K2 was because it was part of our fall conference goals. That was my only reason for that. That's the only reason I said that.
So
So
we will-
I'm absolutely in support of that, of all 3 goals.
We acknowledge this, and in principle, we're looking forward to further research on all three bullets.
All great. Absolutely.
I'll just put endorse the concept, K2 assessments and integrated assessments as presented by the department. And then we can refer to, I don't have to pull it out.
So would we have to have another substitute motion then to the previous one?
Mr. Watts, so I understand what you're signaling to me. I think Mr. Alexander's point was well taken. I think you're referring to page 36.
Yes.
Yeah.
Page 20, the slide 36.
Page,
Yeah, so
You
you're
need to say as presented.
on page 36, yeah. The reason I think maybe that, Mr. Watts, other than the group, it's one of your priorities, but also I think part of that just mirrored what the Accountability Commission said. But I agree, I mean, personally, I think that that's a good thing because you're not committing to anything, just other further research. And frankly, I'm just so happy to hear that like educators talk about things that matter.
We appreciate that you're hearing it. Well, this is, hey, I've met with the superintendents and they're good with it, and I think that's what you were referring to, like you said. Absolutely. Yeah, that we actually do feel like you genuinely are hearing. Yeah, you're genuinely hearing, and that you will follow up. Not just say we'll follow up, and then talk to one of us and say, I followed up.
Right?
Correct?
Yes.
Yes.
It's,
So are we clear on the motion, or do we need to clarify? We're good. I know Shannon has it, but everybody good?
Can you read that one more time, please?
Yeah. To receive the report and endorse the concept regarding K2 is it assessments?
Yes.
And developmentally integrated assessments, as presented by the LDE, and encourage further research regarding the ACT and LEAP 2025 tests.
So, and we'll get that really clean, but it's those 3 bullets. It's in
Right.
endorsing further research on those 3 bullets.
I just really liked what Mr. Alexander said about using those 3 bullets, and so if we could put those 3 bullets perhaps in the specific language, I would feel better about that.
Okay. No other questions? So we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Do we have any opposed? So that motion carries. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Brumman. Thanks everybody for input. We look forward to more. We look forward to it. But it is kind of refreshing that the Accountability Commission, superintendent, that we're all kind of rolling the boat in the same direction. That's encouraging.
and all of the information shared is the same.
Ma'am?
And that all the information is the same, the slides are the same.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Can't get over that.
Number 4, our standing item, new business, and we'll move on to, yeah, so I have a motion to receive 4.1, consideration of revisions to bulletin 1903.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second to receive that? Mr. Javi has a second. Joe Breon. All right.
Hey, good morning. I'm going to be short and sweet. My name is Chanda Johnson. I'm the Deputy Assistant Superintendent of Academic Content. So I have been part of a work group that's been working on some revisions to bulletin 1903. And I'm going to talk you through this really quickly. So we went into this work realizing that our current bulletin had not been revised in a very long time. And since it has been revised, the definition of dyslexia has been changed in statute. So it was definitely time for us to look at it again. This is the schedule that our work group followed. So a hurricane, of course, interrupted one of our meetings, but very, very quick timeline, but we knew it was important for us to get this revision done. So where we currently are is, I've listed out the major revisions to the bulletin here, and I'm not going to read it to you. I know that you can review them. But essentially, we updated the definition of dyslexia in the bulletin. We slimmed it down. It was about 23 pages before. It's down to 5 pages of what really matters most. Now, when you look at the bulletin, you understand what to do, and it's in order, and we're very proud of the work. So what we're doing moving forward is, and this just shows the process we went through, but the work group itself has endorsed the bulletin, as did the Early Literacy Commission at its meeting earlier this week. We presented the revised bulletin to SEEP at their meeting yesterday. They weren't able to vote to endorse because they didn't have a quorum, but there were no objections, and they were very pleased with the changes. And we plan on presenting the updated bulletin to Bessie at the December meeting. So just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this work. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. That is the last thing.
Mr. Watts, just to let everyone know, Kim Canizero and I both serve on the Early Literacy Commission. We did have just a few recommendations, but as an Early Literacy Commission, we did vote to endorse with a couple of definitions and minor changes that some of the real experts on phonemic awareness, phonics, morphemes, graphemes, etc. wanted to add, but we did as an Early Literacy Commission vote to approve with just minor tweaks.
Other questions? All right. Thank you. Do we have a motion? Okay. So anybody opposed to receiving this motion? Moving on, then 4.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 135, health and safety. So do I have a motion to receive? Motion by Ms. Eagles.
Second.
Second by Mr. Powell.
That would be done.
Oh, there, I'm sorry, the mask. I didn't see the mask, Doc, that's pretty good. You just threw your voice out, Joker, without, the mask didn't move. That's pretty good. I know, I can't see with these glasses.
Good morning.
Morning.
Michael Como, Health and Communities Director here at the department. As you might know, House Bill 371 Act 259 was passed this past session, and it has to do with athletics and best practices around activities occurring outside of climate control facilities. And these best practices are supposed to follow guidelines set out by the American College of Sports Medicine and the National Athletic Trainers Association related to heat acclimatization and wet bulb low temperature policies. These policies should occur on campuses where summer conditioning, fall or spring sports take place around practices and games. We worked with the Louisiana Athletic Trainers Association to establish best practices around heat acclimatization and wet bulb low temperature. And we're recommending to Bessie at our next meeting to modify Bulletin 135 to implement these best practices. I'll be glad to take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Wet bulb low treatment.
I knew you were going to ask. It's a measure of heat stress in direct sunlight, whereas heat index is measured in the shade. So wet bulb low temperature measures temperature, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, and cloud cover, which is solar radiation. So it gives more of an accurate assessment around the conditions outside during practice or games.
So this is about whether or not kids should be practicing during those times?
Exactly. Exactly. The best practices outline when practices should be held based on low temperature, how much rest should occur, how much fluid should be taken during those breaks. In terms of heat acclimatization, there's a 14-day acclimation period, and it's spelled out in a schedule. So, for instance, on days 1 through 3, there are certain activities that can and cannot occur, and then it goes through that 14-day period.
So what's the difference, so what would be the difference between what's already happening and what coaches are doing compared to what would be different from this?
There's no direct policy right now about heat acclimatization and local temperature. We have injury prevention in Bulletin 135, but it doesn't include these elements. So this is in addition to the injury management program in Bulletin 135.
So there's extra protections?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's best practices. Yes, sir.
Has a list of the best practices already been vetted, or is that an ongoing process? I guess what I'm asking is, will we be able to see the best practices before the actual revision of Bulletin 135 goes?
Actually, the best practices are outlined in the proposed revision, so we can share it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to see what that actually looks like. I mean, Dr. Ebar, you have a question?
Yes, how, is there a way, something we need to purchase to measure the wet ball and gloves?
Some schools may already have them, some may not, but a wet bulb temperature device, it sort of looks like a handheld cordless phone or a walkie-talkie, if you will, and it has a screen on it, and has an antenna with a bulb on the top of it. It's probably less than $200. When it comes to heat acclimatization, there's cold tubs that are normally required, but you can buy a Rubbermaid 100-gallon tank or tub for less than $100. So there might be some costs that schools don't currently have them. I would think that some schools that have an athletic trainer probably have some of these practices in place because they follow the guidelines around the Louisiana Athletic Trainers Association, but some may not.
And if we don't, then that's an expense that we have to incur in order to be in compliance with the policy.
Yes, ma'am, but it should be less than $400 per school is my estimation.
Less than 400 or 400?
Just come on, Derek, could you send, will you send that to us, please, or understand? So we'd like to see.
If you send to me, I'll send to them.
Yes, sure will.
Any other questions? All right, we have a motion to receive this, and get opposed to receive this report. All right, that motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Colon. I would say that's our favorite motion. Mr. Rock. Dr. Brown, excuse me, I'm gonna let them adjourn. Yes, sir. Just want to let everyone know that if you need additional face masks, as I talked about earlier, the newsletter after Thanksgiving, we'll put a request in there where you can complete that, and we'll try to fulfill that to the best of our ability. Also, our next load of rapid test information, we'll send that to LDH tomorrow. So there was information in the latest newsletter on how to request that. So you still have time to request those tests if you need to do that. Wanted to just make a point of clarity around the 3,500 students who have tested positive and 1,600 faculty staff. That's over the course of our school year. So that's been since August. That we're right there. A reminder: reopening roundtable is tomorrow morning for system leaders at 9 a.m. If you'd like to participate, we'd love to have you on that call. And then finally, before you adjourn, just remember you're all that and a bag of chips. And we appreciate college. So, thank y'all for a great meeting. Appreciate the stuff over there. We're going to be here for a while. Thank you all for coming. Always worried that we got to drive all the way down to this meeting and we get nothing out of it. And I don't feel that way today again. So thank you for your input. Look forward to working on some of these things for the future. And y'all be safe going home and have a happy Thanksgiving. Meeting adjourned. No vote.